Welcome to Unraveling Midlife. I'm your host, Sarah Spence. Thanks for joining me as I speak with all sorts of inspiring people about their life and work, and how events in their astrological midlife help to get them where they are today, with some original music added in at the end. If you're new to the show, welcome. You can follow me on social media as Sarah Marlowe Spence on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And I encourage you to subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already, and to share it with someone you think might enjoy it. Astrological midlife relates to Western astrology transits that run from the mid-30s to the mid-40s for every human. Each of the four main midlife transits have an overall theme, though details do vary by generation and by individual. I'm right in the middle of these four main midlife transits, learning lots along the way, especially from my guests on the show. Check out episode 9 for a deep dive into these astrological transits. This episode, 15, drops on the day of the new moon in Taurus, that also happens to be a solar eclipse. Eclipses happen every 6 months, usually in pairs, occasionally triples. Astrologically, eclipses have more of a power punch and an ongoing effect for some months. Also today, we happen to have Neptune, Jupiter and Venus conjunct, that is close together, in the sign of Pisces, with all of these planets completely at home in this sign. Mars is also in Pisces, and a few days ago so was the moon. That's a lot of Pisces. The influence of letting go, compassion, also grief, and music, all of which relate to today's show. My guest today is Christiane Trammell. Her midlife journey, as you'll hear, involves the beauty and pain of learning experientially through grief, and then connecting with whenua, land, and family. Christiane is an empowerment coach who draws on her rich experience, providing reflective narrative on connection and tikanga, as you'll hear. Christiane lived in Aotearoa, New Zealand for 15 years before returning to her native Austria, where she is currently experimenting with living there as an adult. We met through the festival that she organised and have a common love of kirtan, joyful chanting. We were also both gifted Sanskrit names that begin with the word prem, which means unconditional love. Here is our insightful and reflective conversation. Christiane, welcome to Unraveling Midlife. It's great to have you here.
Kia ora, Sarah. Thank you for the invitation.
So you have an interesting story to tell about your midlife, but before we get into that, tell the listeners, I know a little bit about you. How do you identify yourself? We were having quite an interesting little discussion before we started hitting record about identity and identifying as a yoga teacher. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, good point. So it's interesting. We did talk about that a little bit. It used to be so much easier for me when I was able to just say, oh, I teach yoga. And I've always done it with great passion, and I was reaching people they were touched by. I enjoyed it. So I was thriving. I was traveling the world. I was working in New Zealand at festivals, organizing festivals, doing similar things back in Austria. One thing that I noticed that I couldn't quite relate to was like depression or burnout. I could never really understand why people are depressed, or how could you be depressed, because life is so good and I was so happy and so full of energy. I was doing trainings in Ayurveda, in different styles of yoga, embodied flow, and I loved all of that. And I feel the last 5 years, something had changed. I actually discovered how it feels to have depression or burnout. So I went through a difficult phase in my life, which now I do look back towards that. And I feel I'm now able to share from a different place, where I can actually help people and I can relate to it. I know how it is to be in a difficult situation and going through challenges and actually find your way back home to yourself. Now I'm back in Austria. All these things do come together. So now I go through these transitions also with the world. We're all like changing so much. The best word I do have is burn. My heart is burning for empowerment. So how can I support other people in getting to a place where they feel empowered? And that's my own journey from feeling powerless towards empowerment and standing in my truth, standing in my strength, living my passions. That's where freedom lives. Yeah. To sum it up, could be like empowerment coach, working with people to guide them through challenges in life and show them by leading with example, there is a way through it and you're going to shine.
I know that you're kind of you're probably about a third of the way through the astrological midlife transits that I often talk with guests about. And that first part, I know for me and my experience, was that first part, the Pluto square, was quite challenging, and you're coming towards the end of that and partway into your Neptune square. So the midlife transits have kind of come at that same time of a lot of pressure and a lot of change in your life, it sounds like, with the depression and the burnout, and I can totally relate. And I trust me, I'm sure a lot of, or most, if not all of the listeners can relate to that too. What was your story? What has your journey been like in the last while?
To start with that, like I'm now 39. And it's interesting because about maybe a year ago or half a year ago, I saw that you're doing a podcast, and it is called Midlife Unraveling. I saw it, but it didn't really sink in. I kind of like, oh, that's not me. I was like, that doesn't affect me, or like I didn't really see it.
A
And
lot of
then
people think midlife's about menopause, but astrological midlife is usually well before that.
I couldn't relate to it. I was like, midlife, but that's not me. I didn't really see it. I didn't even look into it because, yeah. And then I was talking to some of my friends who are the same age, and I was sharing with my good friend from New Zealand. I said, what's going on? Like I had so much energy, so much passion. I traveled the world. I was so positive. And then life changed. Like it feels like there was a before and after. And the before was like very energetic, young, like the maiden. If it compares to that, like being a young girl. And then I entered a relationship. I got married. I had a family. It was quite a stable setting, a house. And through that was at the age of 35, I got together with my husband, who has passed away a year ago. And this time was quite challenging because I'm still unpacking it. It was beautiful, but also very difficult because he had a heart disease or heart condition. And so I took a lot of responsibility on for him, and living, knowing that, we only have a short amount of time. So through that time, it was quite challenging. I did experience depression. I did experience burnout because I was looking after the family. But and I couldn't really find my way back to my strengths. And then I thought, and I explained to my friend, and she said, "Oh, she has similar things. She had such energy before, and now it's not. She feels burned out. She feels tired." And she said, "Oh, it's midlife." And then I was like, interesting. So I do think yeah, something is changing and I could relate to that. And then I started listening to your podcast and I thought, oh, it's not that bad. It just means that um, new priorities, and it feels like now I have lived a little bit of life. I got more life experience because, well, I had a relationship. I was married. I was a mom for 4 or 5 years. I had a girl who calls me mom, and that's not there anymore. But what's next? And how do I, yeah, how do I move forward? And it's a time where we can really be taking time to clear how do we want to move forward to heal our wounds that actually got us into depression and burnout, because it wasn't his fault. It wasn't. It's yeah, it's healing process. I feel the healing process actually starts at at that age where we actually have the courage and the strength to look into childhood patterns that kept us in a certain way, that led us towards burnout, depression. So for me, the last year or not last 9 months here in Austria on my Finua have been very healing, and I'm very appreciative of everything that happened before. So yeah.
And you talk about Austria being your whenua. Can you tell some listeners that might not be familiar with Te Reo Māori a little bit about that,
Mhm.
and personally what your connection is with it?
Yes, so I'm from Austria and I moved to New Zealand maybe in 2006. And then I stayed in Austria for a little bit, but New Zealand was my home for most of my adult life. So then 9 months ago, I moved. I wanted to go on a holiday to Austria for 3 months. After the 3 months, it didn't feel right for me to move back to New Zealand because I realized I actually haven't lived here as an adult person. And there was so much that I was now able to heal, and I have been through a lot, and I really needed that nurture from my whenua, from my the earth, my river, my awa, my mountains. And that's because my husband, he was Maori, and we lived by tikanga, which is the, I only know it in German, but tikanga is how, like, rituals and how things have to be, certain rules around. And
Sometimes
it's
it's
so
translated as customs
customs,
or
yeah.
culture, or sometimes law. Like it's not really
Mm,
an easy word to translate into English, is my understanding.
that's correct. And I remember when I met my husband, he was talking about tikanga and law and customs, and I was always rebelling against it. I thought, how stupid is that? Like all those rules and stuff. But then once you live by it, it makes sense to live in a certain way of, like, the karakia was an important part in our life throughout the day, the karakia, the prayer, to give thanks, to know where you're from. And that's something I did not know. I didn't know, like, Maori, they can date back their whakapapa to, like, right back, way back. In Austria, I don't know my roots, my whakapapa. I don't know the names of my great grandparents. I can date it back to maybe the second generation back, but not further.
Mm.
So learning from what I've learned in Aotearoa, living there, I'm now incorporating that in my life here, connecting to my roots through my whakapapa, which is so important. I started learning. I came back with the intention to learn the karakia, the prayers of my grandmother, because I think I'm very lucky. At the age of close to 40, I still have my grandmother who is almost 90, and we actually sit and I can ask her, hey, Nana, which kind of prayer do you pray in this situation? And we pray together. We pray the rosary, we pray all sorts of prayers that she has learned from her. She's been passed on those prayers from her grandmother and from her ancestors, which is beautiful. So coming back home to Austria, I what I've learned in Aotearoa, I'm incorporating here, and it brings me so much healing, really. Mm.
What a gift to be able to sit with your grandmother. I know that in the last couple of years, I've thought often of my grandmother who passed away, 14 years ago, and thought, gosh, it would be so interesting if I could ask her what it was like during World War II, for example, because we live in unprecedented times for the Western world for our generation, and wouldn't it be interesting to kind of have that perspective? So that's so great that you're able to have that time.
Mm.
So you had that must be contributing to your healing in a lot of way, along with some of the other things that you're doing. How has your healing, what has that consisted of?
The healing, I do think about that a lot, what healing means. And for me, it's bringing awareness to your wounds, or to, and allowing things to be, coming into acceptance. So healing has happened on a lot of levels. For example, within my family, within my immediate family, where some wounds have happened. And being able to do that is amazing, because it frees you up. So you're not stuck in your own story of, like, I'm an empath. I feel a lot, and I've always felt a lot. And I do know that a lot of empaths feel a lot. Our biggest fear is rejection, because we feel we are different. We're not quite like others, and we feel the rejection. So what we're seeking is always approval. And as a young child, yes, I was adventurous and very open. And so then you start changing that, because it sometimes gets you into trouble being so adventurous. I remember one day, I I think I was 5, and I saw the people from the kindergarten walking past our house, and I just went with them. And I went on an excursion. So my mom, she was heavily pregnant at that time, and she was freaking out because she lost her child. I wasn't there. And when the kindergarten, maybe a few hours later, called her, she was so angry with me. And I was really afraid of her, because she was just screaming. And she locked me into my room, and she said, you wait for your dad to come home. He will punish you. And I was sitting there in my room being afraid and actually fearing for my life, because I thought, my dad, I don't know what he would do with me. And I was so scared. And when he came home, he was just laughing at me and like hugging me and saying, hey, come on, let's play. He didn't even, buy into that. But what I'm saying, what I want to show about the healing, that throughout my life, I had the pattern of being super anxious if I didn't know what was coming. And I was always found myself in a situation where I was waiting for an authority, my boss or Immigration New Zealand. Well, it was a big topic. Always waiting for something, an external force to punish me. And this really kind of controlled my life, because I lived my life by that, in a way that I was afraid of authority. I would have, I was panicking really easily. I was triggered really easily, and yeah, sometimes a bit dramatic or traumatic. And the healing that happened was, for me, when I came back home. First, I didn't want to stay here, but I realized after 3 months, the healing is still ongoing, and I do need to connect to my land more, to my roots, to my family, to my whānau, which is so important. And we had talks about it. Like, even my sister, she is a mediator, and we sat down with my family and to say how we felt in certain situations. And slowly things started shifting, by also me not seeking their approval, but kind of being grounded within myself, feeling I don't need approval. I wasn't afraid of anyone rejecting me. I was saying my truth, and things started to heal and to shift. And slowly the healing happened, which is so beautiful. Not being bound by those limitations anymore. That's freedom, and that's so amazing because I thought about it just a few months ago that with everything that's going on right now in the world, especially being in Europe, being so close to Ukraine, it's like 500 kilometers away, not far. I'm not afraid. I'm not in this anxiety that I used to be. I don't panic. I have the things that I do, prayers, or I'm out in nature, but I actually enjoy life because life is nothing is for granted anyway. So I enjoy the moment.
Yeah, learning presence. I think that's been, yeah, definitely a lesson for me in these times. More time inward and less time out in big groups. Definitely being present with self has been a big theme of the last couple of years. Mm. So tell me about your coaching. You work with people using the tools that you've gathered along the way?
Yes, pretty much. I mostly people come to me with a similar background. Of course, you draw people towards you who have experienced similar things or who are like when I work with a coach, when I get my own coaching, I orient myself towards people where they are where I want to be, like people who are successful in their business. So I've noticed a lot of people who are empaths, we tend to stay sometimes in a bit of a victim mentality, and life is happening to us, all the bad stuff, like life is happening to us. And I know that because I was stuck in that pattern for quite some time. And there's a moment when you shift your perspective towards empowerment, when you actually feel that life is happening for you. And that's where I help support people, and I work with coaching to with individual people. So I've gone from teaching yoga to or doing my programs to more people, to working with individuals because I really want to also use my energy wisely too. And that's something interesting when you're teaching yoga. Sometimes I felt um, yeah, I want to, how do you say this? I want to work with people who really want to get out of the victim mode, who really want to make the steps towards self-empowerment. And a lot of people, not everyone wants to, it's sometimes easier to just stay where you are and say, this is happening to me, like attention seeking, and people are coming to help you. uh, Not everyone makes that step, and that's okay, maybe in another life, or but now I want to use my energy wise as well, so I can help people who really are ready for that step, and we can work together. And I usually incorporate things that have worked for me. Like I relate a lot to the Maori health system, which is the Whare Tapa Whā, the four corner steps of health. Um, Wairua, which is the spiritual side, working on the body, the thoughts, and the heart, the emotions. So that's so important. And the family funnel. That sometimes when we talk about body, mind, spirit, we forget the whānau, the family aspect. And that for me was quite a game changer to come back home and to heal the wounds from whānau, and to change my perspective around it, because it was not anyone's fault. And yeah, so
Can you
that's
talk a
that.
little bit more about whānau in that respect? I mean, everyone has such a different family. I have a very, very, very small family. So it does fascinate me because everyone's, I guess, and I've done a little bit of family constellation work, so that's like another view again of family. And how did that go? I mean, I guess I have a great relationship with my family in general, and not to talk about me, but I know that too much. But I know that some people are, especially empaths, maybe don't necessarily talk a lot about their feelings. And I guess I'm drawing on that time that I had adrenal fatigue and I wasn't really talking about my feelings or feeling my feelings, and it was kind of family related when my stepmother was really sick, that kind of thing. So how did you go about speaking? Because a lot of people are like, oh, that's my family, I can't tell them how I feel because they're just so different, they don't understand me. How do you start? What was your experience?
I think I spend a lot of time in nature. I spend a lot of time with less people around me, so I could really see what's happening inside. And I was very trying to be very aware of what's actually happening. Um, and I did have support too, like the right people come into your life as well. You do have to do, like, I would always recommend to do work with someone who is specialized, like not like a therapist or constellation work, to really we don't always see the trees, or how do you call it, the trees in the forest, the obvious. So interesting enough, I have my sister Katrin. She's actually trained in mediation, and she's specializing in empaths or hypersensitive people, because certain the intensity of feelings, they can be quite different sometimes. So she actually was doing a session with me and my dad to facilitate that, to actually let me speak, and then without interacting, and then I heard him without interfering there. And that actually helps if we're not engaging in that drama of like, oh, you said this, you said that, but actually let it stand on its own, and then you reflect for yourself as well. So sometimes it's really good to just get it out and not, and also communicate that, it's not a discussion. It's rather an I hear you out and you hear me out. That's what happened. And I think that family hour is such a important factor of how we perceive our reality as an adult, like what we perceive as normal, or how the relationships of our parents is really what shapes us. And it's time for us to, at some point in our lives, to actually look into that and heal.
And maybe that's the gift of this time, of this midlife, astrological midlife, is to kind of like, it shakes us up, it makes us look at ourselves. For many of us, I mean, some people don't, and then they kind of have total crises. So at least we're having a look, figuring it out along the way. But yeah, it's definitely been, for me, an amazing opportunity to get to know my parents as individuals and as friends. And I've used the Darlene method quite a bit along that way too. So as you're talking, I'm like, oh yeah, I've done a bit of family constellation, but actually that particular practice that I've been doing is probably, as we talk, I get my realizations of that facilitated a lot of understanding as well. And of course it all keeps, the learnings keep going and going, because this is life and this is us. And so when you said that the people that come to work with you, they often have a similar background, do you mean in terms of empath, or in terms of losing someone close to them, or maybe either or a combination?
That's interesting too, because I don't want to be the grief expert, but I have had my experience with going through grief of losing a loved one, which is my husband. And I think that the topic grief is quite a raw and authentic one. You can't really hide it. And a lot of people have connected with me who have lost someone, and they share their story, and then I give them another perspective on life, how I experienced it. And I share a bit more about that. I feel very blessed that I went through, that I was able to support my husband on his journey. on his transition. And while it was painful, it was equally beautiful and something that I think about a lot. It's very precious. Grief has so many gifts in itself, which is amazing. It's an emotion that you can get stuck into it, like you can actually stay there for a long time, but you have to make a conscious act to actually to come back to life. Because my husband and I, we had time to prepare for his passing. We knew on that day it would be his last, and we knew the weeks before it's coming to an end, and we actually lived by that the last years, because he had a heart attack, and they gave him 2 more weeks. That was 2 years ago, and I prayed for a year, and we had to. So we talked about death. I asked questions. He explained. I shared my view, and we lived with it in a way that we didn't take things for granted. We enjoyed a coffee together. We sometimes went out for a drink. He loved to sing. He loved doing his music, and he was so inspiring in so many ways that he never gave up. Like, he just did not give up. And that's inspiring. Like, 2 weeks before his passing, I remember I asked him whether I could give, we had like plates and cutlery for about 100 people at home. And I said, hey, can I, not throw it out, but pass it on to someone? And he said, no, I haven't given up on that retreat yet. So he was still living, and he was still, yeah. I learned a lot from him, and I'm still, as I said, unpacking. And because we lived our life being so close to death sometimes, it was beautiful. Yeah. It was also exhausting as well, because throughout that time, because his health was usually, not more important, but it was more present. I kind of didn't look after myself so well. I exhausted myself. I burned myself out, but it wasn't his fault. It's just how it happened. And yeah, that's the learning.
Many carers get into that situation. I watched my dad do the same thing, as he was in that similar position with my stepmother.
It's interesting. After he passed away, like, it's an interesting one, because you think it gets less over time, but actually you grow with grief. You can tap into it really quickly. Like on certain dates, I am allowing myself to actually feel it, and I listen to music and I dive into it, and I feel appreciation. Sometimes I feel like so many emotions. It can be like anger, and you get really angry, and you get stuck in that story. But forgiveness is a good cue and acceptance. Yeah, and then it shifts again. So it's really, really a very tender process that I don't want to miss, because I feel it actually has brought me closer to living life with more presence and more peace. Yeah.
It's great that there's someone like you. I imagine that because I haven't lost anyone that close to me, all I can do is read about it, really, or listen to people talking. And I have done quite a bit of that to try and understand what my dad was going through. And it's great that you're there for some of those people who need support, and it's easier to have someone that they can relate to who knows what it's like. So that's great that you're there to be able to offer that space. But it does keep going. Like it's like a dance, it seems. The dance with grief, because it's never gone. And they say it grows with you.
Yeah. And I've noticed a year ago, I was at doing a yoga training, restorative training with Swami Karma Karuna, who you also know.
Who's also been on this podcast, actually, episode 3, I believe.
And we were in a group of people, and someone also has lost person, and I've noticed like people do want to talk about it and to give grief space. But if someone hasn't experienced grief, they might be afraid of it because it's not something that you do really want to touch that topic because it doesn't affect you. But once it does, it changes. So there's a bit of fear around it on both sides. And I remember sometimes when I mentioned, people ask me, so are you married, or what's your status? And then I do mention, well, my husband passed away, and people are shocked, or they feel very apologetic, like, oh, sorry, I didn't want to, disturb you, but I'm not disturbed by that. I'm actually, it's okay to talk about it, and it's not something that I want to hide. But I noticed that people get quite uncomfortable with it, and I'm wondering, like, I have my own, not conclusions, but yes, I understand it's not um, something that they might, sometimes they are afraid that I burst into tears and they can't hold that energy, or I don't know what they feel, but I think it's just they can't relate to it. And I've noticed that I made a few connections with people, like a friend here, a mom, she has lost her boy when he was maybe 20, 25 years, just a few years ago. And I asked her questions like, "Oh, how was it for you? Like, what did you do in the ambulance? Like I asked questions that no one else would have asked, but for me it wasn't a taboo because I've been there. I was holding my husband's hand, and I know how it feels to touch a body when he's kind of gone, and I know that I was trained by hospice nurses to do certain things to relieve the pain. So I'm not shy about it, and I've noticed that a lot of people do want to talk about it, and it feels like kind of like for me it was normal to talk about death or grief, and yeah, and it was an important time of my life actually. Yeah.
It's definitely a journey.
Hmm.
Because I remember when you're a teenager, if no one close to you's passed away, it's completely and utterly foreign. It's a whole different journey, and
Hmm.
it doesn't really get talked about. So I do kind of wonder who's listening and what their process is as they listen to your story, and there's a little bit of reflection on my part and what gifts that brings them in this kind of
I
process
have
of reflecting.
one gift that just came to me, which I find is very interesting in way of timing. So while I was going through that 1.5 years ago, like through hospice and kind of supporting my husband while he was passing away, my family back home, my sister and my mom, were doing the same thing with my grandmother, my mom's mom.
Oh,
So that was interesting to actually check in with them, like, how are you? How are you sleeping? Is she okay? Asking those questions. So in that way, I wasn't alone, and I wasn't alone with the emotions afterwards. Because sometimes when we lose someone, there are regrets of, I wish I would have been there, or I would have said that. Um, and for me and my husband, because we were able to prepare, nothing was unspoken. We actually acknowledged, hey, it wasn't easy with us always, but, I'm thankful for having you here, and I love you. It was so important. So no matter what we were going through, that was just, we were at peace with each other, even though I do hold some anger sometimes, or like things do come up, but no, it was love remains. So then, because of that experience going through that, I actually thought about the regret side, and I was like, hey, I've been living away from home for such a long time. I've been away from Austria. If something would happen to me, I wouldn't want my family to think, oh, but she was having such a hard time and she was not home. I haven't seen her. And I started a conversation with my sister, and I said to her, hey, Katrin, you know what? I just want you to know that if something happens, you need to know that I was living the best life and I made my choices. I always wanted to live in New Zealand, and I always wanted to marry this man, and I always wanted to work with horses. I've done the choices, and I'm so happy that I'm actually doing that. And I said, if the time comes, and I'm not 39, So we don't talk about it because death is not in our field. But I said to her, Catherine, please know that. And she said, oh, I was actually, she was contemplating over the same things because she had just experienced death with my grandmother and she was there. So she, of course, asked similar questions. Yeah. I had another friend. She was also going through a similar phase and through similar things that I was. And I was sharing with her how I wouldn't want anyone to have regrets. And she told me that she started to write letters for her family members in case something would happen to her. So she not a goodbye letter, but it's a letter saying, I've lived a good life and I want you to be free and like there are no regrets. And I actually shared that story with someone recently when I was in Medjugorje, which is a pilgrimage. She has lost her husband. So I shared that story with her and she said, wow, I didn't think of that because she lost her husband unexpectedly. Like he had a sudden heart attack and he was gone. And it's now 5 years and she's still in the grief phase. And she said, oh, if I die, I want it to be quick as well. But she was talking about the regrets, and I shared with her that I have a friend who started writing like letters, and I'm gonna do this for myself too. Just needed some time, but I'll do it. And it's very relieving to do that because if anything happens, you can share what you have to share. For me, it was important to know, and it is important that that I've made choices in my life and I'm happy with that. And if something does happen, because our time here is short anyway for all of us, it's not long compared to eternity. So it's, yeah, I lived my life in a good way and whatever comes will come. Yeah.
And that is something that does happen. You lose someone, whether it's someone incredibly close or someone that, I know at the age, I don't know if it's happening to you, but there's friends that are starting to pass away from getting ill and passing away. It kind of makes you kind of sit up and kind of hang on, what am I doing with my life? Am I living it to the fullest? I mean, that's what astrological midlife is about, especially once you get to the Uranus opposition, which you've got a few more years, and mine's coming on in a few months' time. Yeah, it's like, hey, the universe says if you haven't kind of aligned with your soul purpose now's the time to do it. So yeah, that losing someone really does get you questioning what life's all about. And are you still singing? You said that music was really important to your husband, but I also know that you were singing too. Were you singing together?
I am
and are
still
you still
singing.
singing? You are. Great.
I have my guitar, my beautiful Fender here. My sister's guitar, and I do sing my own little songs, and I record it, and I will be doing more of that soon because now it's spring, and I found a really beautiful church where I can sing, and it's different times now. Like it feels winter has come to an end, and winter was really introspection. There were also lockdowns, so it worked really well. Now it's springtime here in Austria and people do want to go out again. And also I do want to go out and share music and share my work in a way that's very healing often for other people too. So yeah, I still do that.
Great, exciting. And if people want to contact you, how do they find you?
christianetrimmel.com.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing your journey. And it sounds like even though you're, a third of the way maybe through midlife, so much has happened and given you the gifts of much reflection so far.
Thank you, Sarah.
All the best with your empowerment and helping of others along your midlife journey. Thanks, Christiane.
Thank you. Kakite.
I've been songwriting recently as a great outlet for emotion, channeling the letting go of the Pisces as it's been arising in my life. But that's not what I'm sharing here, though you can find some of that on my YouTube channel. As today is the solar eclipse in Taurus, a sign ruled by Venus, I'm sharing a song I wrote for my astrology course a couple of years ago during my Pluto square transit. The assignment was to present about Venus and our relationship with her. Here's a live recording from the astrology classroom.
Venus is beauty, she's relationship, she's love. Ruling Taurus and Libra, she's the evening and the morning star above, depending. Venus beams out for the feminine, the heart. She's my relationship with my personal world, sitting at the top of my chart. Venus is the goddess of love and practical Capricorn, in the adventure of the ninth house, not in strength, weakness, detrimental fall. She shows me beauty, harmony, intimacy, and sensuality, artistic ability, luxury, and creativity, sensibility and practicality, and all its Capricornality, in its house of adventure and outdoor activity, travel for spirituality, truth-seeking and vibrant festivity. Like this instrument. Venus for me is warmly affectionate. I give useful gifts, overarching travels and adventure. Stable and active at the same time in matters of the heart. I wish for common goals and spiritual alignment with quality time and honest care. Venus shows me romance, kindness, artistry, appreciation and intimacy. I embody you with organized reliability for my structured exploration of things foreign, expanding consciousness and all with adaptability. You can see it's structured. These verses, there's a chorus, and there's this chord. It's A9 shape, and it's beautiful. It reminds me of spring and Peer Gynt and Venus. But I also capoed, and I put it in the key of the other astrology related course I've done. This is the key of Venus. You show me beauty, harmony, intimacy, and sensuality, artistic ability, luxury, and creativity, sensibility and practicality, and all its Capricornality, and its house of adventure and outdoor activity, travel for spirituality, truth-seeking and vibrant festivity. Yeah, Venus, you're my personal planet. We're giving earthly love to my heart and femininity.
Wow. That is so cool. That's awesome.
Unraveling Midlife is brought to you from Aotearoa, New Zealand by www.sarahmarlowspence.com. Theme music is by Sarah Marlowe Spence and Saraswati Marie Willis, and art by Samantha Hepburn.